Okay, hello everybody. You're watching Going Viral, and it's February 23rd, 2022. And tonight we're going to have Victor Wallis, you're in Boston, Ken Aaron's in Los Angeles, Dennis Goldstein is in New Jersey, Mike Jankowitz is in Manhattan, I believe, or maybe Brooklyn, but I think you're in Manhattan.
Queens.
Queens, okay.
Thank
And
you.
Steve Jonas is in Manhattan, right? Steve? Okay. So you guys can put on your, well, just leave yourself muted because we're going to go right into the news. There's something going on, I've heard, between Russia and the Ukraine, and everybody's getting really fixated about it and upset. So I'm going to play a little thing from our very good friend on PBS, whose name is, let me get it. Let's go, Judy. Here we are.
Russia accused the U.S. of bringing Nazis to power in Kiev. The United States said it's Moscow that is guilty of aggressive moves. Stephanie Sy reports.
In the United Nations Security Council today, a fractious discussion over the crisis in Ukraine. Russia accused the U.S., which called the meeting, of inciting panic and attempted to shut it down.
The open format for discussion proposed by the US on this extremely sensitive topic is making this a classic example of megaphone diplomacy.
But the meeting continued with Russia in the hot seat. The U.S. pushed the Kremlin to de-escalate its military buildup along its border with Ukraine.
This is the largest, hear me clearly, mobilization of troops in Europe in decades. And as we speak, Russia is sending even more forces and arms to join them.
Diplomats from around the world urged Russia to stand down or face consequences.
In the best case scenario, the scale of the Russian forces assembled on three sides of Ukraine is deeply destabilizing. In the worst case, it is preparation for a military invasion of a sovereign country.
But the Russian envoy again denied plans to attack Ukraine, charging the U.S. with escalating tensions.
The discussions about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You are almost calling for this. You want it to happen.
The U.S. and its NATO allies have rejected Moscow's demands NATO pull back troops from Eastern Europe and ban Ukraine from ever joining the alliance. Ukrainian officials today said they had the right to decide their own treaties and alliances. At the White House, President Biden called the Security Council meeting a critical step against Russia's military posture.
We continue to urge diplomacy as the best way forward. But with Russia's continuing its buildup of its forces around Ukraine, we are ready no matter what happens.
For weeks, Russia has massed more than 100,000 troops along Ukraine's borders and has now begun joint military drills in neighboring Belarus. In Ukraine's east, Ukrainian forces continue military drills. Meanwhile, volunteers in Kyiv have begun self-defense training. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
Okay, so that's a brief video to kind of set us up for a discussion of what's happening in the Ukraine. I know that Mike has something he wants to say about what he's researched and figured out about the Ukraine, and tell us where to put our coins, where to put the chips on the table for the Ukraine versus Russia. You want to go first, Mike?
Well, I'll go briefly first. I'll probably have to come back at the end. But basically what's going on here is Putin has sent troops into the disputed, quote unquote, disputed regions in the eastern Ukraine, which he supposedly are predominantly Russian speaking. I don't know who does the polls in this area, but and according to Russia, it tends to lean towards Russia politically. But so he's sending quote unquote peacekeeping forces in there. I mean, in other words, what that means, I don't know. Is it an invasion? Well, yeah, he's sending troops in, so he is quote unquote invading. He hasn't attacked Ukraine, what you might call Ukraine proper. In other words, the non-disputed part of Ukraine, which is the larger part of it. Although, again, Putin has in the past disputed Ukraine's sovereignty whatsoever. But in this case, now we have a situation where, again, it could blow up at any point. Zelensky says that Putin isn't taking his phone calls or his attempted phone calls in order to negotiate. The U.S. says negotiation is still on the table, but it looks a little bit more far-fetched at this point. And basically, it's a matter of whether or not Putin and whether or not, or if and when Putin decides to pull the trigger, and to what extent. But right now, we already have Russian troops and Russian armor supposedly coming into what is officially Ukraine. So at this point, we can see the what they call the Donetsk and the Donetsk, the rebel-controlled areas. So he's sending the troops in there. How far, much further he's going, I don't know. I mean, it may be, my opinion is, and this is just strictly my opinion, again, he's got the domestic situations to worry about. Right now, he seems to have most of the Russian population rallied behind him. But he's kind of almost possibly backed into a corner, because he's got to do something, he feels, otherwise that he'll look like he's pulling back or conceding. On the other hand, there isn't much he can't do. The idea of all the false flag operations, which he's been trying to, whether or not they're false flags operations, again, is up for debate. But the U.S. and the West, Canada and Britain, Australia, are claiming that they're false flag operations in which he's sending troops in to protect the Russian-speaking population from Ukrainian attacks, artillery attacks, and mortar attacks. That's what Russia is claiming, that the Ukrainian attacks, and the West is saying, no, those are false flags, and the West and Ukraine is saying those are false flag operations, just to give them an excuse to come in. So basically, it's on a hair trigger point right now. So I'll let everybody else give their takes on the situation. That's just what I know so far, adding to what Judy Woodruff just said.
Okay, well, pay attention. We're going to learn a lot from Victor Wallis. Fill us in, Victor. What's going on?
Well, what I like to bring attention to is something that's well known, but that is not sufficiently emphasized by the corporate media. First of all, that the expansion of NATO was a violation of the understanding that the U.S. had at the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And they've done a certain amount of expansion, but at this point, it's reached a kind of limit. And I think that we as a kind of a peace movement need to demand that the U.S. drop its insistence on the expansion of NATO. And I think closely connected with that is the issue of Ukraine's membership and Biden's description of the situation, because what Biden says is that Ukraine should have the right to decide whether to join NATO. Well, the Ukrainian elected government that was in place in 2014 had good relations with Russia, and the U.S. stepped in to overthrow it. So the choice for Ukraine, in that sense, was made by the United States. So I think that, when we talk about a diplomatic solution, we have to talk about something that's acceptable to Russia. And it seems that the idea of not having NATO right at its doorstep is a very strong and I think perfectly legitimate one. And I think what we have to emphasize is that we as a people have nothing to gain from the expansion of the U.S. Imperial sphere, which is what NATO is. I mean, NATO is the kind of the agent of U.S. expansion worldwide, and it's no longer just North Atlantic. brought in Colombia. They've invoked it in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan. It's the North Atlantic moniker has become meaningless, and what was described initially as a defensive alliance has since the 1990s been clearly a proactive and even offensive force. So I think we need to tackle that and bring that constantly to the forefront of public attention, and make the demand simply no to NATO.
Okay, who's next? Let's see. Who do we got? Who's next? Oh, Steve. What do you got to say about the current status with the way Russia's playing this game? And it's
Right.
obviously they're defining the game and the rules, or pushing for that. Go ahead.
Well, I certainly agree with Victor about the eastward expansion of NATO. In fact, I published a column, was it yesterday or the day before, on Op-Ed News that contains references to documentation that, in fact, there were written agreements. They may not have been at the level of treaties, which I think it was a big mistake that Gorbachev made. It didn't get the signature on a piece of paper, but there are documents, and I've received them from several different sources. They're not private, and they're in my current column on Op-Ed News that said very clearly that one of the agreements that the West made, particularly in the United States, when Germany was reunified and the Red Army was withdrawn from Germany, there was an agreement that the NATO would not proceed. One source said east of the Oder. I think that may be a over exaggeration, but certainly that it would not proceed eastward to, for example, include Poland, which it does, and Poland directly borders on Russia. It would not include the Baltic states. It does. It includes all three of those little darlings, which, well, Lithuania is not so little. Border on Russia. And in terms of the current conflict, as long as it appeared that Putin's demand was that Ukraine not join NATO, that was something, first of all, a reasonable demand. Second of all, negotiations. Putin says he wants a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. Well, that's impossible. We know plenty of diplomatic history where treaties have been violated. But there could have been a time period, and there could have been some other considerations. There could have been a consideration, for example, of the recognition of that Crimea is part of Russia. What is, I've said numbers of times on this program, but what is often ignored is that the primary reason, well, there were two reasons why Russia occupied Crimea in 2014. One is that the vast majority of people, well, three reasons. The vast majority of people in Crimea speak Russian. The second is that until Khrushchev, quote, gave, unquote, Crimea to Ukraine, and he was Ukrainian in part, in 1953, that it was part of Russia, of the Russian Republic of the USSR. But the most important thing was which is little recognized, was the Russian naval base at Sevastopol. The Russian naval base at Sevastopol was and is the only warm water port of Russia. At that time, when there was a reasonably pro-Russian government in Kiev, the Russians held the port on a 30-year lease. What they were very afraid of was that when the government switched to a, quote, pro-Western, unquote, government, that they could simply leases are cancelable, and that they could cancel the lease. So I think that was probably the most important reason why they took Crimea, so that they they would, they would have it in perpetuity. What's disturbed me is that in the last day or two, it seems that Putin has gone beyond simply a guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO. Now, I thought, along with a lot of other people, I've heard of reported people in the high-level security apparatus in the Biden administration thought that Putin was bluffing. I thought he was bluffing too. I didn't know that they thought he was bluffing. That would make me even more confident in my estimation that he was bluffing. But the moves that he's making now, and I'll finish up with this, and I'd certainly like to hear Victor's comment on this as a political scientist and historian. The speech that Putin gave yesterday is a complete distortion of history. I am not a professional historian, but I am an historian by inheritance from my father, who was a professional historian. And when somebody does that sort of thing, it really disturbs me. He said Ukraine was never a country. That's not true. Ukraine was a country on and off from the time of the Middle Ages. That the original settlement from Kiev that was established by Vikings, apparently, they got it. Boy, I tell you, those Vikings, they really got around. How they transported those boats over solid land is anyway. That the original Rus was was established in Moscow came from Kiev, and Ukraine has been a country on and off. It wasn't always part of Russia. In the 19th century, the western portion of Ukraine, which is the capital of which is Lviv, as they pronounce it now, was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire because it had been part of Poland, and it was the part of Poland that went into the tripartite split of poor old Poland when it was divided up between Prussia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Russia. So there's this distortion of history, which he then uses to justify what appears to be a military onslaught, has me very disturbed. I have a few other comments to make, but I've been talking for a long time now, and I'll save them.
Okay, you deserve a break. So, Frank, I'd like to go for you to get the hard facts on the ground. What do you think is going on?
Well, apparently, I just heard about this. Mariupol may be under shelling, so that's an interesting.
Could you repeat that? Who's under shelling?
Mariupol, the one on the port city on the Azov.
Oh,
that's
really?
Interesting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's just a hearsay. But yeah, well, this is a continuation of that meeting they had in which there was a dressing down supposedly of Narishkin, the intelligence officer. You know, I read it differently from the way people are interpreting that. I think that was really like the hole in the wall gang. They're just about to take the bank out with the federales, and everybody's agreeing to it and sort of haphazardly. But the boss, that's Putin, is saying, you're not getting away with that. You're not putting it all on me. I'm not going to be the fall guy if this thing falls through. You're all going to get up and say you're accomplices. You're culpable in this. And don't even try and wiggle out of it. Because what he's about to do could make them all war criminals at the end of the day. I mean, he may think he's a Napoleon, but you've got to realize that two of his marshals were executed at the end of 1815. So as glorifying as that may be, there's a reality of when you cross behind crossing the Rubicon, as Caesar found out. So they're scared stiff, some of them. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're in contact with the CIA and Mossad and MI6 telling them their fears. They are absolutely on the verge of doing something that is of major consequence. The interesting thing, too, is what's going on in Ukraine. they've got a lot of pro-Russians there. And it seems that this is more like France 1940, where you've got a lot of left communists who are, because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, are basically on the side of the Germans. So there's this debates going on as to why they shouldn't do anything and just like sit still. They're not doing what you would expect them to do, given the circumstances that literally within possibly the next hour, there could be some massive pincer movements coming into the middle of Ukraine. You've got nobody budging an eye in the middle of, in Kharkov, according to that Clarissa woman who's over there with CNN. And that's weird. That's just flat out weird, because you should have streaming people, streaming lines of refugees getting out of there as fast as they can, but they're not. So that suggests to me that there's a lot of people saying, hey, it's okay, you'll be all right. And that's of concern, because even though the Ukrainian army is talking about fighting to the last man, I think the what I call the Kabul syndromes there underneath it all, and that is, I'm not going to lift a finger. I don't care if we do go back into medieval times. I'm not lifting a finger. So I'm not sure what the Ukrainians are going to do.
Okay, Frank. Let me follow up with. Follow up with Frank for a second. I'm going to mute you for a second, Frank, because there's a kickback. If you can put on headphones, it'd be good. Anyhow, I just want to ask you, Frank, in Kabul, I mean, there were reports that the Taliban had been paying the soldiers and the government hadn't been for like a year, so that when they did the coup with the turnover, it was, it was already agreed upon. And perhaps, I don't know how sincere all this noise and what's it called, pomp and circumstance going on at the UN and in the media. Maybe this has all been arranged between Putin and Biden and Germany and everybody and the moneyed powers in the Ukraine. You got to realize, Biden spent a lot of time in the Ukraine, him and his son. I don't know what kind of deals they were making, but they certainly had influence and arrangements. So maybe everything's being handled in the back screen, and all the drama is going on in the media, and but it's really not going to be that calamitous. It's just push us to the end of our seats and then back off. So what do you think about that? And now I'll put unmute yourself, please.
No, I mean, if you thought of that about France, there was a fight, okay? And no, that was not prearranged by Churchill and was Daladier and all the rest of it. No, it wasn't. And that's I don't know where that's almost like a conspiracy theory. That's ridiculous. But what you can count on is SVR and FSB and GRU have been operating very in a medium that is easier to operate in because there's so many Russian speakers. For them to turn people or even to have them in two minds as to what to do is a simple tradecraft. I mean, if they can't do that, they can't do anything, quite honestly. And that's exactly what they're doing. And I think this will be essentially in areas that there's going to be a lot of poor suckers in the Ukrainian army who will fight. But there's going to be others that, just open the back door, basically. I can't see it not being any other way than that. And that's of concern, because at the end of the day, you're going to have what I call an immaculate blitzkrieg. There's straight to the Dnieper River as a first phase. It's going to be a showcase, a template for other operators, and specifically Xi Jinping. It is really disturbing what's about to take place, and we're talking about within the next few hours. I cannot see I don't know. As I said, he's crossed the Rubicon and he knows it. And it's a scary thing he's done, Putin. It is as scary as you can get. And everybody in that kindergarten kind of musical chairs thing where they're sitting there in the Kremlin are completely aware of what they're doing. They're trying to dupe a Russian population into believing this is for the sake of rectifying wrongs that were done historically, which is, that's revanchism and all that stuff. That's got to be slick the way of doing it. I mean, it's all choreography. I mean, it's all what they've been practicing for so long. What I think is about to take place could end up with a lot of Ukrainian POWs, a lot of them. And at the end of the day, again, there's certain things I was not aware of, and that is that apparently Ukraine is a supplier of neon gas, which is extremely important for manufacturing chips, computer chips. Like 90% of ours over here, that's called a Rubio, are made in Ukraine. That's interesting. It's also a breadbasket, a major breadbasket in the world. And also it's got a massive defense industry, all in the eastern part of Ukraine.
Okay.
So we're talking about a major gain. And I keep trying to say to my friends and everybody that, war from Stalin's point of view and from the Russian point of view is about gaining, is profiting from war. You don't do it. It's like Kelly's Heroes. You do it because it makes sense to do it from your point of view. You're going to be risky, but at the end of the day, you get something out of it. We don't do that. We don't do war like that. This is their way of doing it, and it's scary, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, I think, literally by the end of tomorrow, we may have a completely changed environment there, completely. And by the way, it will be a different paradigm too in the world, completely.
Okay, Frank. Okay, Frank. We're gonna go on, and here's the sequence. I'm gonna go to Dennis, then Victor, and then to a new fellow who joined us, Alex. But Dennis.
Also, Ken, I have some more information.
Okay. I'll put you on the queue, Mike. And by the way, anybody who wants to, go to the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. So then I'll know to call on you. Okay, so let's go in order here. Dennis, then Victor, then Alex. Dennis, what's your viewpoint on this? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, the U.S. is exploiting historical antagonisms between Ukraine and Russia. Meanwhile, the U.S. is violating the agreement that was made with Gorbachev, which was that they would not move 1 inch toward the east in NATO. And NATO has been violating that agreement. So we have a situation where the United States is trying to basically surround Russia, and at the same time to exploit historical antagonisms between the Ukrainians and the Russians. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to Victor. What have you got to say in regards to what Frank was bringing up and also
Steve also wants to get in, I think.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's go back. All right, I'll put Steve up. Again, raise your hand, please. Go find that raise hands. Okay, go ahead.
You gotta, Ken, let everybody know again about the reaction button, because I don't think they know what you mean.
Oh,
again,
okay.
He literally raised his hand on the screen.
Okay, got it. At the bottom of your screen, it says reactions. And if you click on that, at the bottom of that, it says raise hand. Then I'll know you want to speak. So we're going to go now to, excuse me. We're going to go to Victor, then Alex, then Steve. No, Victor, Alex, then Michael, then Steve. Go ahead, Victor. What's your reaction to so far what's been said?
I can't say that of course, that I'm happy at Putin's latest measures. And I have to say that I also have little sympathy with great Russian idea and all that. And that's unfortunate. But the reason I emphasized the U.S. role is that that's what has provoked this. And the trouble is that when you start antagonizing, you put your adversary in a position where they take a stronger and more defiant position than they would have taken otherwise. I mean, I compare it to the whole situation with the U.S. and Iran. I mean, the U.S. Overthrew a government in 1953, as we all know, installed the Shah. And so then when the Iranians came back and rebelled against the Shah, they took a much more sort of irrational, nationalistic, in that case, religiously inspired form. And I think we're witnessing a little bit of that in this case, that they brought the U.S. by its provocations has brought out the most adversarial and even given the nuclear factor, dangerous of Russian responses. And so it's going to be harder to arrive at a kind of settlement, a diplomatic settlement now than it would have been earlier. Nonetheless, that's what we have to press for. We, meaning the popular forces, the people in the various countries around the world, none of whom really, in their vast majority, want war. I mean, they all ordinary people recognize that war is catastrophic. Not that many of them will express it sort of openly, express their position in a forceful way. But we need to build on that, and there has to be more presence of the public in the streets to kind of bring us back to the basic underlying issues here.
Okay, thanks, Victor. Thank you, Victor. And now, come on, Alex.
All right.
We've been waiting. We've been waiting for you.
Yeah, I just got back. Let me first address one of the points that Frank brought up, which again, I'm always rather amused when anybody tries to assert that again, Frank's American, like the rest of us, their country is, holier than thou, and that, every other country fights for, greed and personal profit, but not mine. So again, and then Frank went around to assert, okay, there's this economic gain, for Neon, I think it was, there are these, industries that would benefit the U.S., but no, those can't possibly be reasons for the U.S. being involved in this crisis. But let me say something more general, though, more importantly, which I think is why Putin has taken this particular step, which is my understanding is that and the Russians pretty much concluded that the West was going to sanction them anyway. And so they essentially took the step, okay, well, if we're going to get sanctioned anyway, we might as well get something for it, which is, again, to detach the Donbass area. And I remain, again, skeptical that apparently, some Russian troops are moving into the Donbass, although it's assertions that, they're like flooding in. And I don't think they're even going to go to the border, essentially. I think they will, in which case, again, it would be pretty hard for them to use that as a jumping off point to invade the rest of the Ukraine. I think they will, stay in the center and towards the east, and just, wait and see what happens, essentially hope that that will lead to a ceasefire and, the detachment. But I don't see any proof yet that they're going to move beyond that.
What about the troop? What about all the troops in the Belarus? They're surrounding the north.
Oh, sure, they can stick. That's to pressure the Ukrainians and NATO. But they're not going to be able to stay around forever if they don't invade. And so I think at some point, they will. If nothing happens, they'll detach the Donbass, and then we'll have to draw down their forces at some point. Obviously,
well, historically,
there for months.
I think historically it was accepted that if you're surrounded by oppositional forces that look like they're going to invade, you're justified in doing a preemptive strike. Isn't that what Israel did in the 6-Day War?
Right.
But so, and nobody criticized it. They said it was brilliant.
Well, no, historians have criticized it since, because they've actually found records that Nasser never intended to invade. So they've, the revisionist Israeli historians who argue that, well, like Elon Pop, that it was an aggressive war by Israel in '67, and again because. Again, Itzhak Rabin, who was the chief of staff of the IDF at the time, said that they knew they weren't going to be attacked. So again, right from the horse's mouth, essentially.
Okay, but if you're surrounded by, hostile forces,
if the Ukrainians are going to preemptively attack the Russians, that's essentially suicide. I mean, if they want to do that, then how could we say,
but wait a second. If the Russians want to invade Ukraine, wouldn't it be to their advantage to say, no, I'm just having a picnic here on the East Coast. Don't get so upset. Relax.
Right.
My troops they're coming close because they want to give you Christmas presents. Don't be worried. Let them in. It seems very preposterous.
Sure.
You don't think so? You don't think
sure, the United States has done the same,
well, no. We're talking about...
1845 Mexico. That's what we pretty
That's
much
fine. Did. No, pointing out all the... You can go through histories and point out the villains. Sure. But what's going on here with the Ukraine and Russia? You're saying that there's nothing to worry about, but the rest of the world is saying, why are you surrounded?
I agree.
Forget what we did. It's not the U.S.
We can't be sure what Putin's going to do, so we can prepare. But to suggest the Ukrainians make a preemptive attack, I mean,
no.
First off, they would be slaughtered if they they would lose their, then Putin could pose as, whatever even if you're anti-Putin, you could pose as the victim of a enemy attack. He'd be justified. He would rally the Russian people to him, and he would have more support in whatever war would happen.
And you don't think he's trying to provoke that?
Well, I think the U.S. started the provocations. I think we're trying to goad him into attacking. Certainly, I think.
You think the U.S. is trying to goad him?
I think that.
Okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to shut up. Yeah. So let's go.
Let Steve. Steve has been wanting to.
Yes, Steve is next.
Steve, yeah. So let's go. Steve, go.
No. Hold it. No, Mike is next.
Okay.
Then Steve.
Well, first of all, corrective, Alex. And we should all be cautioned about selectively using selective evidence for determining history. The best information, most unbiased information that I had was, as far as the 6-Day War, was that the Israelis may have determined that they determined an attack was imminent, but not necessarily immediate. But however, and in which case they chose the best time to do a preemptive strike, which doesn't necessarily have to be the day before an imminent attack. But that being said, and going into a little historical thing, what Putin's got right here, I mean, one analogy to it could be Montgomery's colossal cracks plan following D-Day in 1944, in which you apply pressure at various points along the front and just keep on throwing the enemy off balance. And actually, even though individual operations may not have worked that well, the strategy worked. It worked very well. And in this case, Putin's got something that Montgomery didn't have, which is he has enough logistics in place to put through these cracks, to attempt these cracks simultaneously. So that really, if it goes to an all-out war, no, I don't think Ukraine stands much of a chance. But what the arming, basically the arming of the general population will do, will make a protracted occupation by Russian troops very, very difficult and painful for the Russians. Also, I wanted to bring in something that we could discuss also, which was that the Kenyan ambassador, I believe, to the United Nations, if I'm correct, Yes, the Kenyan ambassador, Martin Kimani, brought up an interesting parallel, if we're talking about history, which in which he says Kenya, basically he said, and this is the quote that's from the article, Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. That analogy, and again, analogies are dangerous because they don't always apply exactly. But if that's the case, what he basically seems to be suggesting is what Russia is doing right now is colonialism. Now, to be fair, Putin stopped short of saying we're going to take back Ukraine into Russia, and basically has so far just said that we're going to recognize the regions in which the rebels have claimed autonomy. We're going to recognize those as basically not part of Ukraine and as independent areas, independent autonomous regions. He didn't necessarily say he was going to absorb them. At least he didn't say it yet. So this whole idea, and again, when we get into history, Steve made a good point about the fact that, I mean, Putin, like many people, including many people in the United States, has a habit of, shall we say, inaccurately quoting history. Ukraine was a country, but in Putin's mind at least, and in the minds of many Russians, Ukraine should not be another country. So what we also should focus on, I think, here is we're leaving one major player out of this discussion. People talking about the United States, whether or not the United States is colonial, whether or not Russia is colonial, whether or not what they're going to get out of it. But there's one major player we need to take into account, and that is Ukraine. And Ukraine is basically the one that's going to, whatever this major power geopolitical warfare that's going on, warfare of words that's going on, Ukraine is the one that is being directly threatened. And the situation here is what does Putin want? And it's beginning to look clearer that basically he wants Ukraine.
Okay.
If Ukraine is going to be independent, it's got to be totally allied with Russia. Again, you can say, well, we're not going to take Ukraine into NATO in the near future, but you can say we will never allow Ukraine into NATO.
Okay, Mike, we've been through that. We've been over that
but the idea is that we should be looking at the Ukrainian point of view as well, I think, in this discussion.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go to Steve.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, something that's come up in the last couple of days, which I think is some people in this country, when I first saw it, I reacted to it like a lot of other people did. It's high comedy. That is that Trump is coming down on Putin's side, and Pompeo is coming down on Putin's side, and Carlson is coming down on Putin's side. Now, what Carlson did with it was quite different than Pompeo and Trump were simply doing, shall we say, blank kissing. Carlson was using it for political propaganda. He said, why shouldn't we be for Putin? Putin doesn't want to teach about racism in schools. Putin doesn't want to give money to poor people. Putin doesn't want to, Putin would shut off the border, and this whole list of issues. And Carlson, there was a terrific clip that was played, I'm sure other places too, but on Morning Joe.
I think he froze, Ken.
Yeah, he froze. Okay, so that's the internet. So let's go back. Alex, you got something you want to add on this?
I mean, I got a clip related from about the state of emergency from Al Jazeera that the Ukrainians are declaring that I thought was interesting.
Okay, let's run that.
'Cause I don't think you guys probably covered this.
No, I don't think so. We just covered it.
Yeah.
We
Well,
had
we
a-
did.
We had
did
a
have
clip of
something
the
from
UN. We had a
Judy
clip from
Woodruff
the UN.
about
Judy
the
Woodruff.
UN Security Council.
No, but this is about the Ukrainian government declared just a state of emergency, essentially something like martial law.
Go
So
ahead.
this is
Okay,
rather,
there's
you
a
know,
difference.
quite a big step for them. It remains to be seen, of course, what they actually do with it. But yeah, it's a good clip anyway. All right, I'll put it full screen.
Sound.
Right. I'll share. Don't worry. Okay, here we go.
Across the river is an area the Ukrainian army call the Grey Zone. Neither the Ukrainian soldiers nor the Russian-backed separatists control the area. The army say separatists shelled the bridge a few days ago. Ukrainian soldiers guard the river bank.
They shelled it using roughly 122 caliber weapons. We were luckily sheltering under cover at the time.
In the distance I can hear what sounds like heavy artillery and machine gun fire. The Ukrainian government has in the last hour or so declared a state of emergency. Now I remember being here in April. There was a man fishing at exactly this spot, and the bridge was a vital connection point for people living in the Grey Zone who used to come to this village to shop, to buy medicine, and some of the children used to go to school here. But that's simply not possible anymore.
Close by, 46-year-old Katya unloads a delivery of wood. Her brother and sister live across the front line in separatist-controlled Donetsk.
They're my family. Should I shoot them or they shoot me? The men are being conscripted there and they are being conscripted here. What nonsense. This is the 21st century and look at us running around with guns. We are torturing each other.
Despite the risk, 27-year-old Michael still goes to the river to fish.
Come on,
He was injured in a car
That's, yeah.
accident in 2018.
Come on, Alex.
Or not, or he's
Restarted
nuts.
a year later, and he hasn't been able to get the physiotherapy he needs.
Oh, interesting.
since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have shelling every day. You can hear it now. I've just come down to check that it hasn't scared the fish away.
Well,
This
when
is
is
one of a
the
number of
where's the
destroyed
piece
homes in
about
the
the
village.
declaration?
Well, they mentioned at the beginning they get into it more.
This looks like
This is from they have a frontline
17-year-old
reporter,
Stepan
and then
was
they're going to interview somebody from Radio Sputnik to get a Russian point of view.
Borat.
Damaged
This
by
looks like a
shelling
Borat movie.
describes
you know?
what some
Well,
nights are like.
It's Eastern Europe.
The fireballs this
And
big fly
this has
over
been
our
a war
houses.
zone, so
They pass
what
our
do you
windows,
kind of expect?
lighting the room. The explosions are so loud.
I mean, look here.
On the drive home,
Tell has been hit.
sudden and terrifying
Shelled and so
blasts. Hidden Ukrainian artillery fires shells towards separatist-held territory.
And now I have made yourself.
Booking.com, find him perfect
That's
isn't
enough.
rocket science. Kitchen sorted.
What the Ukrainian army say is defensive action against the Russian-backed threat just over the hills. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera, Granitne, Eastern Ukraine.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, joining us now from Moscow is Tatiana Kukareva, Deputy Head of News from Sputnik News in Russia. Thanks very much for being with us. So I don't know if you've been hearing some of the comments that have been made at the United Nations today, but with the exception of the Russian ambassador, most of the speeches have been very much criticizing Russia and saying this is all on Russia here, and that they are the aggressor, and that this is a conflict of their choosing. What do you say to that?
Good evening, Hazem. Well, obviously, those comments come from the same countries that have been supplying military aid and financial aid to Ukraine all these years. the same countries, some of which actually were supposed to guarantee that there is no violence in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. You know, the Minsk agreements that were agreed upon in 2015 and that were supposed to actually be observed, and they never were. At least the Ukrainian side never pulled back troops. They never stopped the shelling. And of course, the West, you know, those countries, the same countries that supplied billions in aid, in military aid, some in lethal aid. I believe it was just Germany that actually refused to supply weapons to Ukraine, whereas the United States has contributed immensely to Ukraine's military. There's also, you know, there's undisclosed number of US military personnel that is right now training Ukraine's military, although technically, and that's what President Putin spoke about in his address back when he announced the recognition of the two republics of their independence, that any presence of foreign military troops on Ukrainian soil actually contradicts the Ukrainian constitution. And yet, all of this has been happening.
Where is there a presence of foreign troops in Ukraine right now?
Well, look, it depends on how you look at it, right? Because if you're sending in military,
well, the foreign troops are either there or they're not. So where are you saying the foreign troops are in Ukraine?
I'm saying that there are military advisors, so-called military advisors from US in Ukraine. But of course, all of this information, their stationments are obviously classified, as is the number of those military advisors.
Where are you getting this information that there are foreign military advisors in Ukraine? Because that's not we haven't seen any reports that say that at all.
That the US has been sending in military advisors?
Yes.
Well, that was actually, I'm not gonna, obviously I can't say that, I can't just quote my president, but those are very actual, real reports. You can Google them. There are US military advisors, and there have been all these years in Ukraine.
Now, you say that Russia is reacting to what Ukraine has done, and you mentioned the Minsk agreements there. But most independent observers say that the language in the Minsk agreements is very vague in terms of what kind of governance there can be in those territories. And the Ukrainians have argued that it is Russia and the separatists that have consistently violated those terms. What do you say to that?
Well, we can argue about the governance and the language, but the terms of the Minsk agreements were actually very concrete, and they involved pulling back heavy artillery from the separation line. That's number one, the number one point that was never observed from the Ukrainian side.
But the Ukrainians again have said that they are simply responding to Russian provocations on this.
But yes, they are. But they also never provide any proof of said provocations. And again, if we're talking about a pullback of heavy artillery, what is that an answer to? If you're not pulling back your heavy artillery, what are you answering to? What kind of provocations?
You mentioned, you referred to President Putin's speech a couple of days ago. In that speech, he made some comments about how he saw Ukraine's origins, and he said that Ukraine was essentially a country created out of Russia. How would the millions of Ukrainians feel about that?
Oh, you'd have to ask the Ukrainians, I guess. But
shouldn't they have a say in whether or not they a say in their self-determination, and not the words of one Russian president?
Obviously, they should have them, but we have to understand that if those millions of Ukrainians have actually studied their history, they would not argue for the fact that Ukraine was in fact created with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was part of the Soviet Union, which in turn, it kind of, we can say that it was.
That was back in 1991. We're now in 2022. So how do you square those two things?
Well, that is history. You can't rewrite it. You can't change it. And despite the fact that you
But
can,
you say you can't rewrite history. Isn't that what President Putin is trying to do now?
How so?
Well, you tell me.
He's merely stating that Ukraine was created when Soviet Union fell apart, and that it was a very, there were some very creative decisions at that time, and regions that were completely Russian-spoken, including the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, that at the time of, even before the unrest, I believe the data even from back in the beginning of the 2000s stated that 80% of the population of these regions considered themselves to be Russian-spoken and to have Russian as their native language. The language that Ukraine actually made, it was a state language in Ukraine, one of the two. And then they just canceled that status.
All right, we're going to have to...
How do you feel there?
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much for...
All right, so well, that gives you some of the Russian point of view, which I'm sure a lot of people don't agree with on this. But yeah,
actually,
I thought it
Alex,
was pretty.
I have to say one thing, Alex, that that was less the Russian point of. It was the Russian point of view, but he really ripped her apart.
Sure, yeah.
She didn't really articulate the Russian point of view very well. Let's put it. Well, she articulated it very well, but she didn't justify it very well.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
There's a far better thing to watch, and that's the Security Council. I could put it up. It's actually going on now.
Oh, go ahead.
But it's quite long, right?
Well, yeah, it's that's
no,
like
no. This is live. This is actually happening now. This is far more pertinent because what you were just watching was extremely old news.
Okay, go ahead. All right, Frank, put it up for like 5 minutes. Let's see what's happening. Go ahead, share. But be sure to click share sound on the lower left.
Right. Oops.
And go full screen once you get it up. Let's see if I can.
Frank, you having trouble with it?
Yeah.
I can try and get it. Is it just security? Is it from any channel you're looking at?
Wait a minute. I'll get it. Wait.
I think probably PBS has it, right? Okay, I have it. I can pull it up from PBS or from...
Yeah, do that then,
or from the
for some
Washington
reason I can't
Post.
pull it up.
Okay, let me...
If worse comes to worse, see if C-SPAN.
No, they're a bunch... you see Fox has it, so you can... I'm sure it's...
Don't use Fox.
This dish pad is made of stone,
No, I'll use the
but
Post.
dries in seconds.
No,
So you
that's
can
not
replace the soggy towel or
Wait,
tray on your...
wait. Got to get through the ad.
We called and hoped for a backdown
power to
of
the
Russian
Albanians.
Federation from this senseless, destructive, and self-destructive action. We repeat the same call for Russia to stop, to reflect, to reverse its illegal decisions, to withdraw from this senseless madness, to de-escalate, and not to push
Remember, they're
towards
part of
perspectives.
NATO, so...
Several mechanisms are in place and various proposals have been made, including by President Zelensky, whose calls remain unanswered. Diplomacy is like hope. It dies last. But for it to work, it must be seized, not ignored, as the Secretary General just called for here. We call on the fellow members of the Security Council to rally in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia has been warned repeatedly that they will be alone in this foolishness, that they will be responsible for the innocent lives lost, including Russians maybe, and for the destruction caused in the heart of Europe in the 21st century. If they choose to continue to execute their plans, as everything indicates, they will bear not only the consequences of the war, but also the historical blame and shame of invading a neighboring country when its responsibility as a big country as a permanent member of the Security Council, calls for it to work and help preserve peace and security, not to torpedo it. We reiterate our support to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally organized borders and territorial waters. In concluding, I welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine to this meeting. I would like to convey to him, to the Ukrainian government and people, that at this most critical moment in their history, they are not alone, and we stand firm in full solidarity with them for their rights to be free and choose who they want to be. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Албании за его заявление. И сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Secretary General. Thank you for your strong stance and your powerful remarks today at the General Assembly and for your remarks tonight. Colleagues, a few moments ago, I spoke to President Biden, who asked me to convey in the strongest possible terms his and our steadfast support for Ukraine and support for the urgent meeting this Council has convened tonight. Furthermore, he asked me to share that the United States and our allies and partners will continue to respond to Russia's actions with unity, with clarity, and with conviction. We are here tonight because we believe, along with Ukraine, that a full-scale further invasion into Ukraine by Russia is imminent. Tonight, we're seeing the Russians close airspace, move troops into Donbass, and move forces into combat-ready positions. This is a perilous moment, and we're here for one reason and one reason only: to ask Russia to stop, return to your borders, send your troops and your tanks and your planes back to their barracks and hangars, and send your diplomats to the negotiating table. Back away from the brink before it is too late. Last week, the United States informed this Council and the world about what we expected to see unfold. We said that Russia would manufacture a pretext for an attack. We have since seen numerous false flag events staged along the lines of contact in Donbass. We said Russia would theatrically convene emergency meetings at the highest levels of the Russian government. We all saw this on Monday with the state televised Security Council meeting held by President Putin, an orchestrated moment in which the Russian government decided to recognize as, and I quote, independent states, unquote, sovereign territory of Ukraine controlled by Russia's proxies since 2014. They literally violated Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity on live television before the world. We said that false proclamations would come.
Ken, how much longer do you
Russia
want?
Okay, I don't know. I'm done. Let's go. Let's get some commentary here.
We got that.
Okay. What? Well, you go first. Go ahead, Alex.
Oh. Well, I mean, it's what you'd expect again, including, the reference to false flag operations that, that the specifics of which are never mentioned. So whether or not they're real is, well, it's
Sorry,
up
guys,
to
I'm gonna
what
cut
you think of
Wait,
the
wait.
This is more important. This
One
is more
second.
important.
What's that?
I'm going
Frank?
to cut out.
Okay,
Cut
Frank,
out.
just before you go out, okay. He's gone. Okay, I want to throw a carrot into the soup here. So there's something I want to put up on the screen. And here it is. Because I had heard a rumor, somebody making an accusation that the Ukraine wasn't really a democracy. And now I don't know if you people are aware of, I didn't have time to research it. So I just pulled this up. It's a parliamentary monarchy, a republic, socialism, a government in which the means of planning, producing, and distributing goods is controlled by a central government that theoretically seeks a more just an equitable distribution. So they should be in accord with the Soviet Union. I mean, with Russia. You know, it's a similar kind of state. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
they have their oligarchs just like the Russians. It's in fact it's even worse in that sense than Russia, because in Russia at least Putin forces the oligarchs to pay taxes. It's I mean, in Ukraine the oligarchs truly run the country.
So it's a gangster state.
You can't. Yeah. They have their own, like, each oligarch has like their own little group of thugs essentially. So which they can use to they use to say beat up workers to keep them in lines, and any kind of, but also are used politically too, of course.
So
Alex, where do you get this information from?
it's 1 second. It's kind of okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. You're challenging it.
Okay, no. From Mark Ames, who actually has lived in the Ukraine.
Who?
Mark Ames. He's known as the War Nerd. He does a podcast, and he's lived in the Ukraine in the mid to in the 2000s and then into the 2010s.
Well, do you have any other sources?
Well, no. It's the fact that some of those kind of groups. It's well known that again just like with the Russians, that there are connections with Ukrainian organized crime in the oligarchs. But also, I mean, Poroshenko had who's used to be president. He had he had connections to different.
No, Alex, what I'm asking is, in other words, in journalism, we usually have multiple sources, and I'm just asking if there are other sources that we can access there.
Well, I'd have to look up the specifics, but I think it's pretty well known. I mean, just it essentially is a similar structure to what's in the Ukraine. I mean, sorry, in Russia, where of course Putin has connections to the mafia and so on.
Okay, let's not argue that out. You can research. You can look up different organizations, rank country by how corrupt they are, or how much graft is going on. But the point is, the major point is, this isn't some Walt Disney, community, a wonderful, glorious community, like where Sleeping Beauty and everybody loves everybody. It's a gangster. It's a kleptology.
A kleptocracy.
Kleptocracy. Yeah. Excuse my grammar.
Right.
I was
okay. Stephen, go ahead.
Steve. Yeah, Steve. Since you're back.
I'm back. I got cut off. I don't know what happened, but anyway, I was going along at
got frozen.
And that is, I got frozen. Yeah.
Your screen froze on us, and you must have.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
On the track of trying to figure out what Putin is actually doing. I think that I was saying that I think that the connection with the U.S. rightists is very significant, particularly the connection to Carlson, who commands the largest television audience of any single television personality in the United States.
Hip hip hooray! God bless America. Go ahead.
And has this connection to Orban. I talked about that. That the CPAC is going to be in Hungary. It's very interesting. Hungary, of course, is another Central European country that has a common border with Russia. With Russia. Maybe Russia and Ukraine, but nobody talks about it as supporting Ukraine because of course it doesn't. I don't know anything about Slovakia, which is traditionally a right-wing country. It was a right-wing country, at the time of that the Nazis in 1938, Slovakia very easily slipped into the Nazi orbit in March 1939. But anyway, I'm just we keep seeing, looks like we're getting closer to war, and it still may happen, but it doesn't yet. And after this, I want to say something about China. I'm wondering if Putin's real objective here is to make the world safe for autocracy. because look who he's connecting with in the United States. Look who is supporting him in the United States. Look who is certainly an ally of his, even though he's very quiet. That is Orban, who is right in the middle of it. And, Belarusia is an autocracy. So I'm just wondering if that's what the real objective here is, to get, I think I'm not sure how he would continue to get there, but I think that's a goal. I also want to mention about China. I was hoping that while China would not be supporting the Western initiative of attempting to prevent war in Ukraine, I was hoping that they would come out with a clear statement that they are against these kinds of settlements of disagreements, which also applies to a number of situations in China. China today came out with a very interesting statement, and that is what they focused on was the use of sanctions as diplomatic weapons. And they thought that was a very bad idea. They condemned the United States in particular, but also all of the other Western powers are using sanctions. And it's very interesting. Several days ago in The Guardian, people were talking about, how is London going to do this? Because there's so much, in terms of sanctions, there's so much Russian money in London. And there's several major English football, that's soccer, football teams that are owned by Russians. Some of the biggest ones, I can't list them, but some of the biggest. Anyway, but nevertheless, the UK and the Bank of England have pulled themselves together and supporting sanctions. China is against it. Well, I think it's very easy to figure out why China would be against the use of sanctions as diplomatic weapons, and I think that should be recognized. Last comment. I'm going to, in a few weeks, I'm going to be, as soon as I get all this stuff off the list, I'm going to be doing a column on that if you look at the history of human beings, the default system of government is autocracy of one form or another. Whether it was local dukedoms, whether it was emperors, whether it was kings, it was systems of government where ultimately there was one or maybe two or three people at the top who had the final decision-making power. And there are reasons why. There are very good reasons why, which I'll discuss in the column. Experiments in democracy, this is 200 years old. This is not the default position. The default position is autocracy, and I think the world is moving in that direction. And certainly, if I'm right about that, then I might also be right about what Putin's real goal is here, to make the world safe for autocracy.
Okay, that's controversial. Somebody's going to speak up on that? Mike?
Alex, you got to have something to say.
Yeah, no, I am.
Let Mike go first.
And I
agree
with you.
Let Mike go. Go ahead.
I think, Steve, you've come up with a quotable quote there, making the world safe for autocracy, and I believe that is that seems to be the case. But also, I think it's interesting because, to Frank Radford's credit, he had said a couple of weeks ago that before Russia made a move, they're going to wait till after the Olympics. And sure enough, within 48 hours after the Olympics, that's when the Olympics closed, that's when he made his move. China, of course, is looking to this. China has its own plans, to one degree or another with Taiwan. They may be looking for this as well. And that is interesting. In other words, what China will be gleaning from this, whether or not China will, Russia basically let China finish its Olympics and then went ahead to grab the headlines, but not that the Olympics grabbed that many headlines anyway, but except for a couple of doping scandals. But the situation with what China gleans from this is also going to be possibly a dangerous situation coming up in the future. Also, the idea that Russia is when Russia is, in other words, Putin may be autocratic, and he is an autocrat. Or it certainly appears to be, but we do have to remember what one fear that must sit in the back of his mind, which is that what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union. In other words, he has got to keep the Russian people behind him, which they are now. I mean, he's not in any danger of it now, but he certainly must remember that when the Soviet Union fell, it was because there were literally in over 1 million people on the streets of Moscow, and an army. When the army was called in, they would not fire on their own people. So even though he's an autocrat, that doesn't mean he's in other words, it doesn't mean that he cannot be toppled, even through even if he controls the means of voting. It doesn't mean he cannot be toppled. He doesn't seem to have that assurance that Stalin felt that he had. And by the way, Stalinism and Stalin himself have been given a bit of a resurgence in Russia these days. In other words, he's been cleaned up a bit, and that is also a little dangerous because there are a lot of people in Russia who said, "Hey, he beat the Nazis, and look, we'd rather have a Joseph Stalin in power than Nazis marching over our territory," which is very logical, and somewhat wise. But of course, having a Stalin in power only works until you're the person that's arrested and sent to a gulag, or you're the ones that are starved out. We have to remember that Ukraine, while Stalin was in power, Ukraine suffered mass starvation, which is thought to be enforced by Stalin. So
okay, let's come up to the
present.
present.
A lot of things going on here. And one other thing I just want to throw in for discussion is that the idea is that just because somebody speaks Russian, does that not mean they want to be part of Russia? If language was the only factor there, then the United States wouldn't exist, because we did speak the same language as Great Britain, to a certain extent at least. And therefore, what should be determined, and I think that might have been a determining factor in Putin not stepping back from absorbing the rebel enclaves and instead recognizing their autonomy, is that speaking the same language doesn't mean you want to be part of the country from which that language emanates. So it may mean they want their own independent country, but they may not want to be part of Russia.
Okay, great. Okay, let's wrap up on this, because we're beating it to the death. I mean, we're not.
Yeah, so let me.
I don't got anybody listening to me to make a decision about this.
Okay, Ken.
Go ahead, Alex.
And Ken, you're for some reason your image is rather fuzzy. Just
okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's your connection or.
Well, I didn't know you were.
You look a little weird. It might be the filter behind you, or it's
what I've been drinking.
Your face look a little weird. Well, anyway.
But
first, I want to make a factual clarification for what Steve said, because actually Hungary they are on the border of the Ukraine, but fortunately for them, they are not, or unfortunately, they are not. They do not have a common border with Russia. Remember, the only country besides the Baltic countries that have in NATO that have a border with Russia is Poland, because remember there's the Kaliningrad Oblast that kind of cuts on the Baltic Sea, that's that little sliver of land that's west of Lithuania along the Polish border. So that Poland actually again is the only NATO country. Well, except I think Norway, of course, Norway and Turkey, who have actually not Turkey anymore because again Georgia is in the way there. But Norway is the only other country in NATO that has a physical border with Russia. I've to the other thing Steve said. I've heard the idea that by other people on the right and left that this is about Putin forming some kind of like autocrat league, which may be that. Although I think more he thinks the U.S. is good, and he certainly knows from because Hillary Clinton essentially talked about it, that the U.S. intends regime change in Moscow and regime change in Beijing too. So I think, this if this is a alliance of autocrats, it's an alliance the U.S. has created by essentially conflating essentially all the autocrats that are not under the thumb of the U.S. Let's move on.
Do you have? I have.
And have you,
Alex, I hope
did
you're not
anybody
forgetting
mention the attempted lynching in
Alex?
Okay, hold it, Alex. Hold it, Alex. Go ahead, Mike.
I hope you weren't suggesting that Ukraine, what's happening to Ukraine, is not the responsibility of Russia at all, and it's the responsibility of the West.
It's not simply, but a lot of it is the responsibility of the West.
Yeah, but I mean, you
I don't solely know.
Russia
Obviously, Putin is escalating things here, so I don't disagree there. Yeah.
Okay, do you have another video you wanted to put up?
Not a video, because I haven't seen any videos on this. I've only heard about.
No, not on the Ukraine, on something.
I know on other things, but this the story I want to talk about first. It's not one that's been talked about on any videos because it's a relatively small story, but I think it's significant because it involves an attempted lynch. Well, what may have been an attempted lynching. It's been again not covered. I just heard about it because.
Did it happen in the last 2 days?
Last week, but it was interesting. It's in Mississippi, so it's a little bit.
You think it would really have verifiable information?
Oh no, this is in the Mississippi Free Press. This has been.
What's that?
This has been, and it's been verified by the guy's employer, FedEx. You can see here this guy again, African American, 24-year-old FedEx truck driver, and they also already arrested the two men who did this. Well, literally shot at him. You'll see their pictures later in the article.
So what?
Right, so
why is this news?
Well, it's attempted lynching.
So what?
Essentially.
What is it?
Aren't we supposed to have gotten? Maybe you think this is normal, but I thought we were supposed to have gotten past.
I mean, no, I saw articles about women running through the streets, taking their clothes off. People lighting themselves on fire.
It's not important that they're,
it's not a trending item.
This has also been talked about because, again, it looks rather similar to what happened with Ahmaud Arbery. So that this guy, he got shot at. He's lucky. You can see the bullet holes in the bullets in the guy's truck, which shows.
I was shot at when I was living in East LA. And I'm a white
really?
man.
Well,
absolutely.
Not by a white supremacist.
By a Latino gangster.
Or were they trying to kill you? Or were they just shooting, in your direction?
Nope.
They actually trying to murder you, which they were in the case.
Yes.
Well, they must have been watching this show.
There's a big world.
What did you do, Ken? What do you do that was wrong, Ken? How do you?
There's a big world. There's a big world. Shit happens. You know.
So
there's always some kind of a story like this.
The literal bullet on the.
Oh boy, a bullet! Great.
Well,
exciting.
Again, this is even though it's in Mississippi. They arrested these two guys, and again, they're going to be charged with a hate crime.
Well, that's justice in America. There you go.
Okay, I'm just saying.
What's the story?
Just to show that white supremacy is alive.
I think they're race baiting. I think they're race baiting. They're looking for things to upset people and say, white people are dangerous and black people are victims.
They are. But let's go on to some internet.
Alex, was it printed in a non-biased newspaper?
It's the Mississippi Free Beacon, which I think is black owned. But I think they're they're a regular newspaper.
Well, then,
They're
then
you
it's a
know
story.
they're a local they're a lo, you know a myth that covers the state of Mississippi. I think for African Americans. So I think they're reputable as far as I can.
Well,
tell.
Alex, let me ask you a really simple question. When a black man throws an old Chinese lady in front of a train, you think he's doing that out of amusement or hate? Is that a hate crime?
Well, usually when something like that happens, because the guy is crazy. So,
But is it a hate crime? I don't care if he's sane or crazy. Is it a hate crime?
Well, you'd have to find out why did he do it. If he did it because she's Asian and he hates
What if
Asian
she's
people,
the
yeah,
fifth?
then it's a hate crime.
What if she's the fifth Chinese lady that's been hit or thrown in front of a train by a black man? Do you think it might be a hate crime?
It could be a crime. You know.
Well, maybe these guys are crazy.
Well, we'll have to hear about the case.
Ken, you asked whether or not it was a story.
Yeah.
And yes, the woman who was pushed in front of the train was a story. By the way,
right.
A little corrective there.
I asked if it was a hate crime.
Okay.
I asked if it was a hate crime.
If it was a story.
No.
I don't think it's been charged as
there,
such.
Ken.
I know it's a story. It's a hate crime.
If 5 Asian women were pushed by 5 different African American guys in front of a train, that doesn't mean that every single one of those incidents was a hate crime.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's right. I know. You're wonderfully
I mean,
logical.
if it was the same guy who pushed all of them, then yeah.
Same guy, that's different.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
okay, got it.
Yeah. I didn't want to play this again because we have more, well, speaking of hate crimes, more,
now a lot of people are getting killed.
Yeah, more religiously motivated. This time though against Indian Christians. Because again, you see this regarding certain laws that to prevent conversion for anybody from the Hindu religion. That so here, this is again.
This is good. This is different.
Rise in the number of attacks on churches and Christian gatherings. They are being carried out by right-wing Hindu groups emboldened by new laws that crack down on religious conversion. Critics say these groups are abusing the laws to push their own agenda, often facing no consequences themselves. DW Delhi correspondent Nimisha Jaswal traveled to the town of Hubballi in the southern state of Karnataka to meet a pastor who has shut down his church in the face of continued abuse.
The highlight of Pastor Somu Avradhi's week has always been the Sunday service. But now, he is praying alone at his church in Hubli. It is the first time he has been back in more than 3 months. Last October, as the pastor was on his way to the church, he received urgent phone calls warning him that volunteers linked with Hindu right-wing groups were disrupting the Sunday prayer gathering there. They had barged in and started loudly chanting Hindu hymns. When the pastor arrived to question them, they claimed that they had proof he had tried to forcefully convert a Hindu man in their midst. The pastor said he'd never met the alleged victim before, yet he was still taken to the police station on charges of verbally
part of the video.
abusing a man from a protected caste.
I was the one who called the police. I was going to file a case against them.
Somebody's phone is going off. Oh,
I'll handle it.
You can?
No.
I'm hearing somebody's phone. That's probably you, Ken, then, because I think you're the only one. Yeah. Yeah, I'll go back to it then.
But they pushed me aside and started beating me. They beat 7 members of my church. They entered the police station and abused and threatened me.
No action has been taken against the Hindu group. It was the pastor who spent 11 days in jail, and he continues to face charges. It didn't end there. The pastor's family was terrorized in their neighborhood. Their landlord threatened with harm if he didn't evict them. They were forced to move. They also had to pull their daughter out of school because she was being bullied.
My children's classmates were harassing them, taunting them that their father had been sent to prison. My children were embarrassed. I had to pull them out of school. They haven't been able to return.
Over the last year, Christian groups have reported a spike in similar attacks and harassment in Karnataka, especially after plans for a new law were announced.
The state of Karnataka is in the process of passing an anti-conversion law which targets conversions considered fraudulent or forced. But the definition of what is illegal is very broad and the punishments very strict.
Right-wing Hindu groups here strongly support the law. Manjunath Hibsur was amongst the men who stormed Pastor Avaradi's church. He alleges that Christian congregations like Avaradi's brainwash Hindus into rejecting their religion or offer financial incentives to convert. The law, he says, will give them strong grounds to put an end to this.
Once the law comes, we can demolish these churches. We are already prepared to demolish them, but we are waiting for the law to be passed. Once it is passed, our hands are no longer tied. We are free to take action. We can catch them and report them to the police, and they'll go to prison.
For now, Pastor Avradi visits church members at home and only in areas considered safe. This man and his family were also forced out of their village after the attack on the church. But they say they find comfort in prayer. All they want is the freedom to do so in peace.
Well, DW's Delhi correspondent Nimisha Jaswal filed this report and she joins us now from Delhi. Nimisha, these attacks have been going on for some time. Why is the government not doing more to protect these Christian communities?
Well, Gerhard, the simple reason is that the government is often one of those making these allegations. In the case that we just watched, the BJP's elected representative was actually one of the people who led the protests following the pastor's arrest and actually called for action against him. Now, of course, it's important to note here that that India's Christian community is one of the oldest in Asia and dates back centuries, yet the target of these groups, as well as BJP legislators, is those who were born Hindu and have either officially converted or are covertly believing in Christianity. But, of course, BJP legislators themselves have actually been present or have made speeches that directly call for action and sometimes even violence against these communities. And they are, of course, also pushing anti-conversion laws across the country.
Well, tell us more about this anti-conversion bill. What's its purpose?
Well, to look at the one in Karnataka, Gerhard, interestingly, it's called the Freedom of Religion Bill. And if you look at it simply, it actually just prescribes ways to convert. For example, it says that you should let authorities know a month before converting and also report your conversion a month after it. However, all these reports actually allow for time for Hindu right-wing groups to attack or abuse these people. So this is generally avoided. In addition, many kinds of conversions are considered fraudulent or forced and can be charged. The word allurement, for example, is used for what is considered illegal, and that has such a broad definition that pretty much anyone can be charged with forcing conversions, and anyone can report these conversions as well, not just family, but neighbors and bystanders too, and strict action is taken against these people.
Nimisha, India has also been recording a rise in attacks on minorities for quite some time. How is this impacting the Modi government's popularity there?
Well, while international condemnation and attention has been brought to the fact that attacks on minorities are rising in India, domestically, political analysts believe that this could actually be adding to the Modi government's popularity because of this government's agenda of a Hindu Rashtra or a Hindu nation, which is being promoted not only through policies like these, but also laws and as well as silence on attacks on minorities. Now, this, for example, can include saying that Christians are forcing conversions or saying that Muslims are marrying Hindu girls and practicing love jihad. All of these allegations demonizing minorities and saying that Hindus are under threat and that Hindus should take over power and should be the religion that drives the nation. This, of course, plays well amongst the voters for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government as well.
The W's. Nimisha Jaswal there reporting. Thank you very much, Nimisha.
All right. So that just seems, straight up discrimination and,
Okay, one second. Before we discuss this, I just want to add one thing. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to show one thing in relationship to this. I think this is it. Just to recognize, this is the, whoops.
Ken, Jim just joined us.
I know. But let me just get this one thing up here. Oh, gosh. Where did it go? Here we go. 1 second. Come on, baby. There we go. Get rid of that. And then I got it. Share screen. There it is. Okay, just to point out, this is the makeup. This is the percentage of religious practice in India. Just so you're oriented.
I believe the Christianity goes back to it's either the 3rd or the 4th century in India.
That's fine.
Because there's a long history of particularly the Nestorian Christian Church in central and southern and as far east as China.
That's fine. I have a Christian, an Egyptian Christian, and an Indian. You know
I knew some Indian Christians.
Yeah, that's fine. But they're 2.3% of the population. Yeah. There's more homosexuals in India than there are Christians.
Yeah. But again, they're because of the connection with obviously the colonial period. I think they're relatively well off comparatively.
Oh, maybe they're the upper class, huh? Okay.
In many
cases. All right, I'm just
yeah.
pointing up. That's the background about what we're talking about.
Yeah, quick comment on that. There is central locus of Christianity, Catholicism in India, and that is Goa, which
right. The Portuguese colony.
Until liberation in if you can call it that, independence in 1947.
Okay, and now we're going to get a new guest. Jim, tell us about India. I'm sure he knows more than the group of us together. Well, do you know anything about these kind of oppression of the Hindus and the Muslims in India?
Oh, you mean of non-Hindus? It's the Hindus who are doing the oppressing.
Right. The Hindus oppressing the Muslims and the Christians.
I know a little bit, but the reason I'm calling is that the NBC News is reporting explosions all over Kiev right now.
Kiev?
So that's right. And Putin has announced a special military operation has begun. So much for those who felt that he wouldn't attack. Explosions all over the capital city of Kiev right now. I'm going to go back and look at that. And obviously we'll deal with that later. But you guys have a good rest of the show. It looks like the attack has started.
Jim?
Yeah.
Jim, when did this start?
Just right now, I'm watching the news. It's over the wire. One has to verify it, but it looks like the shit has happened. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Good luck.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Jim. Well, maybe we all want to go out and have a Chianti or something. This is... Oh, wait, you know what? Let me pull it up. Let's see if we can pull it up.
As much as you may make light of it, this means that a war has begun.
Yeah. Well, there's been more. There's wars around all over the place. All right. Let's see how bad it is. Where did he say this? Is CNN or... CNN now.
The New York Times is reporting it. I'm sure it's on all the channels,
Yeah.
This is big,
Or C-SPAN. Or C-SPAN is probably still with the Security Council.
I'm not seeing this. I'm not finding it.
Here. Well,
whoever finds it, put it up.
2 large booms. Well, here, I can put up the Times feed. Because they have... Here we go. So 2 large booms in the vicinity of... Over that is Kramatorsk. Here is announced by Putin. Anyone who tries to interfere with us, create threats to our country, must know that Russia's response will be immediate and will lead to such consequences as you will have never before experienced in your history. So obviously it's looking to... And yeah, it's a special military operation.
Wait, Norway ambassador.
The Security Council is already meeting, so I think they're probably talking about this right now. And yeah, Putin's calling on the Ukrainian armies not to fight, basically.
Actually, the Security Council is not talking about it right now. They're going on with their negotiations.
Oh, yeah.
As a matter of fact, it probably, who knows? They may not have been informed, but it probably...
well, you'd think somebody would text them.
Wouldn't change anything there. If the military operation...
Let's see what, yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see what they have. They probably have it live here. Let's see.
Want to pass your certification exams first time?
This is a very different kind of program.
I guess it's just
like
a
he was the
regular.
victim.
So are they not? Huh. Wait, let me see. Ukraine news.
Try MSNBC.
Maybe well, let's try CNN.
Right.
Well, I got some.
CNN Live. CNN Live, probably. Yeah, they got the live stream. They'll probably have. Here we go. All right, we can go ABC.
Do so at their own risk. We also know that a no-fly notice had been issued for the Kharkiv airport. That's the city just to the north of the Donbass.
Maybe Frank is right about that too.
As well at this hour, as I mentioned, the second largest city in Ukraine. After the Ukrainian military reported Russia may target Kharkiv in an attack, and in fact tonight these explosions would signal that in fact is the case. You heard Martha mention earlier that U.S. authorities had urged President Zelensky to leave Kyiv, but in addressing the Ukrainian people, he made it very clear that he was staying put, at least for now. James Longman, our foreign correspondent in Moscow, listening to Vladimir Putin these last couple of days, his address to the Russian people, making the case for moving in, declaring those two separatist regions independent, and James, Vladimir Putin coming back on television in Russia just tonight, declaring a special military operation now underway, and he told Ukrainians to lay down their arms.
That's right, David, and I think the choreography of this was really rather extraordinary. The timing of this message, just as the United Nations Security Council was meeting, and actually just as the gavel went down after the Russians stopped speaking, we heard those explosions in Kiev. They know how to send a message. This is about undermining international cooperation. That is what Vladimir Putin has sought to do for years. And he's done that because he wants to divide his enemies in order that he can carry out his objectives. And we heard in that statement he gave earlier today, that word denazification, a loaded comment there. Very similar to the words he's been using around what he believes to be happening down in the eastern part of Ukraine. This word genocide, he's used it time and time again. This is about appealing to his people, to say to them, this is not an offensive war, this is a defensive war. We are saving people in the Donbass. And he's warned off other foreign elements. He's saying to the rest of the world, don't come anywhere near us because we are in the process of saving the people of eastern Ukraine. Obviously, these comments bear no relation to what is actually happening in that country, but this was a message squarely for his own people. We just heard President Zelensky in Ukraine appeal to the Russian people. Well, Putin has done the same to his own people now. And we just have to see just how far he wants to go into the country. He said he doesn't want to occupy the Ukrainian territory. That was one of the quotes from the speech he gave. Quite what he believes that to mean, we will wait and see, because of course he doesn't really believe that Ukraine should exist. He would deny that if you asked him, but from what he's been saying all week, that speech he gave earlier this week, very, very clear that he believes in rebuilding some kind of Russian empire. And if you just look at what's been going on in this country and the region over the last 10 to 15 years, this is very much part of a path, a trajectory that he has been on. In 2008, the war in Georgia, where again he sought to move the Russian military into an area that he had declared independent. The annexation of Crimea, this is part of Vladimir Putin's playbook. Is he the cold, calculated KGB former profiler, or is he a man bent on achieving his true objective, which is to rebuild the Russian Empire? Could he be both of those things? It was a very, very scary speech, David.
Just an extraordinary split screen playing out on the world stage. The reality that Vladimir Putin is trying to present to the Russian people versus what the West has signaled to the world for several weeks now about Vladimir Putin's plans in Ukraine. I should mention we're hearing sirens now going off in Kyiv, of course, the capital of Ukraine, in addition to bombs, explosions off in the distance, both in Kyiv and in Kharkiv, which is north of the Donbass region. All of that playing out at this hour. We also are aware of this emergency meeting at the United Nations. You can hear the explosions there in the distance. The UN Security Council meeting at this hour, and the U.S. ambassador to the UN had already told the UN General Assembly just today that Vladimir Putin has asked the world to travel back in time by more than 100 years to an age of empires. And Martha Raddat's back with us tonight. And Martha,
Yeah,
I
she
just
never
struck
left.
that what authorities here in the U.S. had warned would happen, the sequence of events that they prepared the American people for, and much of the world for that matter, have begun to play out in exactly the sequence that they had predicted.
It certainly has, David, and the administration kept saying, I hope we are wrong. I hope this invasion does not happen, but it appears clearly they were right. It's happening. You know, David, we were walking around the city today, and people were out. Right now, the city is dark. People will be waking up to this. I'm sure word is starting to spread about what's happening, and they'll wake up to see their nightmare, that their country has been invaded by the Russians. There was an absolute sense of disbelief here for many days, but it is indeed a reality right now.
And it's one that they'll continue to wake up as the sun comes up over Ukraine. And as you mentioned, Martha, to learn that the Russians are attacking their country. And let's bring in retired Colonel Stephen Ganyard, who's standing by with us tonight. And Stephen, you and I have talked for days here about the potential for this full-scale invasion and what that might look like, and whether or not it would expand beyond the Donbass. And just the fact that our reporter in Kyiv, Ian Panel, is hearing explosions, that Western journalists in Kharkiv are also reporting explosions, in addition to those troops that had already amassed along the Donbass. So talk us through what you think could be playing out at this hour.
Yeah, David, as you mentioned, you and I have been talking about this buildup, this massive buildup on three sides of Ukraine. What's not on the map are the 20 ships down here that are capable of an amphibious landing. We know that the Russians have over 400 Iskander surface-to-surface missiles arrayed around the country to cover 95% of this country. So the initial strikes that we think we're hearing right now, right out of the Russian playbook, would be cruise missiles to take out things like surface-to-air missile systems, air defense systems that the Ukrainians would have. That would clear the path for waves of bombers and attack aircraft to continue to hit things like power plants, command and control, internet command centers. So the whole idea here in these first hours will be to create confusion, to separate the government from its people, to separate the government from their military, and to create the confusion that they hope will allow them to begin a ground invasion. That's what's anticipated. Where that comes and when is the question, and it will probably take us hours to see what happens and what Mr. Putin's true goal is in a ground invasion.
Steve Ganyard with us, tracking the potential scenarios that we could watch play out in the coming hours. We're just learning that there's a statement coming in from the White House. Let's go back to Cecilia for that. Cecilia?
David, the president is saying that, of course, he is praying for the people of Ukraine tonight, but perhaps he is really pointing this directly at Vladimir Putin. President Putin, quote, has chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring, and the United States and its allies and partners will respond in a united and decisive way. The world will hold Russia accountable. David, he will be meeting with G7 allies in the morning. He says that he will be speaking to the American people to announce further consequences. And that, of course, is those sanctions, what the White House has been describing, some of the most severe sanctions ever levied. We expect to hear from the White House tomorrow. David.
Cecilia, thank you. Again, you're watching ABC News live coverage of what Russia is calling a special military operation, what U.S. authorities in the West will likely call an invasion, and a full-scale invasion was what they had been warning of all day, saying it was imminent given the intelligence on the ground. Vladimir Putin announcing that this military operation, claiming it's intended to protect civilians. But before we go off the air for now, I did want to check back in with Ian Panel, our chief foreign correspondent there in Kyiv. And Ian, given the juxtaposition of Putin's words intended to protect civilians, I'm struck by what we heard from the Pentagon today, saying if he decides to conduct this invasion, this will be a war of choice and it won't be bloodless.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a dark day for Ukraine and it's a dark day for Europe. We're potentially now looking at the first conflict between two sovereign nation armies in Europe since the end of the Second World War. I think Ukrainians will start to wake up, they'll be hearing the news, they'll be hearing the explosions. Since we've been on air, we've heard at least 3 more distinct large explosions in the night sky here in Kiev. It's not possible to know exactly what's caused them or indeed what the targets are. But of course, against
And when do you want to
this effective
stop
declaration of war by
discuss?
Vladimir
Okay.
Putin,
Wait,
that it could
Hold it.
potentially be some kind of Russian airstrike. But it's a dark day for the country, and people will wake in a climate of fear. David.
Just an extraordinary scene that the people of Ukraine will wake up to. We can hear the sirens going off behind you. Our thanks to you, Ian. Again, Vladimir Putin declaring a special military operation, what the West is calling an invasion tonight of Ukraine. Putin warning other countries that any attempt to interfere with this Russian action would lead to, quote, consequences they have never seen. The White House, as you heard from Cecilia, already reacting tonight with prayers for the Ukrainian people and warning that there will be consequences for Vladimir Putin having taken this action tonight. We're going to continue to monitor these developments. We'll be back on the air as soon as there is something major that develops. Our coverage will continue at ABC News Live, abcnews.com. Again, Nightline later tonight, and Good Morning America first thing in the morning.
Okay. So we can probably speculate that, well, it's interesting they don't say anything about, well, it doesn't sound like you're seeing, you know, Russian planes crisscrossing the country yet. Although I suppose it's possible the air bases they're attacking are, you know, are parts of the country where they don't know. But
And also, they said they were going to use missiles.
Oh, sure, of course,
to take out the anti-aircraft sites. They're not going to be flying until they're not going to be crisscrossing.
Probably not. Yeah, they'll probably take them out
until
first.
the anti-aircraft sites are taken out, Alex.
Right.
Okay.
Well, they also may use standoff weapons from their air forces. That's also and one scenario that people kept mentioning as well, essentially, if the Russians would do a Desert Storm type thing where they would take some weeks to pound the Ukrainians from the air before they would send any troops in. So that's always possible.
I also should say that they were talking about.
But it's too bad Frank got off, because he could have been saying he's been right.
Well, he has been right, and he doesn't have to be on the air to say that. The idea that they were talking about the fact that they don't know where the invasion is going to come from is a little ridiculous, because the invasion could come from 2 or 3 different places.
Yeah, it could come from the sea too.
It could come simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
well, it's something.
Any other comments? Anybody else have a comment?
Yes, I have a comment. I just wonder what does Putin, what does he think he's going to accomplish on the ground here? I mean, I've made the speculation about making the world safe for autocracy, but that doesn't apply to. I mean, supposing he occupies Ukraine, and then there's constant resistance. There's guerrilla warfare, and then he has promoted intra-Ukrainian Russian violence within Ukraine, because there are many Russian speakers who live in Ukraine, even in Kyiv, I've read. I just, I would love to know what is. I think I know what his long-term political objective is, but what his short-term military objective is, I can't figure that out. I mean, it's one thing, to create those 2 tiny, relatively tiny, independent states in the east, and then to contest the Donbas region, which is much larger, but was also primarily Russian-speaking. Bounded on the west by the Dnieper River, which is a very famous river in Russian history. But, does anybody have any thoughts about what the blank is he doing this for?
Well, it's tough to know, because it's tough. We don't exactly know specifically what he's actually doing. Again, we don't know how far he's going. And until you know those kinds of things, it's tough to judge.
But Alex, you've already talked about airstrikes to take out anti-aircraft weapons, and that means that if that's true, then that means that he intends to launch a significant air war, which, when air wars or when you have an offensive situation with air wars, they're always in. They're not like the advanced. They're the cavalry now. They're the equivalent of the cavalry from the 19th century. You send in the planes first, then, like you used to send in the cavalry. And it just...
Yeah. Well, I know one thing he said
say
is
one thing significant. 1 second, Alex.
Sure.
He did say one significant thing. He called on Ukrainians to lay down their arms. Now, I don't know how that feeds into what you were saying, Steve, or anything like that. But that's significant in that he was basically saying surrender and, there'll be no problem. But that should give us some sort of indication of where he's going to go with this.
Yeah, well, that would mean that the objective is what he talked about in his speech either yesterday or the day before, that there never has been a country called Ukraine, which is not true.
Right.
And in fact, the USSR made it very clear that there was a country called Ukraine by making it one of the 16 constituent republics. It was, to the extent that governmental authority was devolved in the Soviet Union, which certainly wasn't very, 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 very great extent. Ukraine had it. So, but he says, no, there never was a country called Ukraine. Well, the logical conclusion of that is for the Russians to take it over, and repeat what Catherine the Great did. When was that, Alex? 17
mid to late 18th century. 17, let's see, 50s through the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that.
Basically,
wasn't the famous general?
They took it all from the Ottomans and Emirate of Crimea. Over there.
Yeah, and Potemkin got the Potemkin villages, and he got Queen Catherine.
Ken, you muted everybody. So Ken, you're muted.
I know. I muted because I'm trying to stop the reverb, the kickback. My immediate reaction is there has to be unification of everybody. When you look at a map, if they take over the Ukraine, being simplistic, they take over the Ukraine, that borders with Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, all of those, Romania, but also it's a threat to the other 2-3 countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, because Belarus is sort of an ally now of Russia. So that's those countries, Eastern Europe. But if all of the NATO countries and allies do a blanket hardcore isolation, you have to handle it as a maniac. It's like a maniac thing to do, to start a war like this, because we've just come to accept it in the Middle East, where Lebanon gets destroyed or bombed or something like that happens.
One thing you may think this is. And we getting reverb? That this will humiliate the West, because the West will, assuming the West, doesn't wind up fighting with the Ukrainians, doesn't send any troops, and Putin wins, then he may have thought maybe, this is humiliation, not for NATO, for the West, for the United States. It shows that NATO is a paper tiger and so on, and. As again, that assumes things turn out well for him. Obviously, if things go badly, then Putin will be in trouble. So,
Whoops! I'm sorry for hitting you there.
Yeah,
it's a gamble.
But war is always a gamble. So
yes, but the U.S. military is formidable, and so is the CIA and all the black operations and.
Although the U.S. assessment is that we would lose a land war in Eastern Europe.
Wait, hold. The fact is, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, which means this may well push or pull countries like Sweden and Finland into NATO. Right. It actually may strengthen NATO, because what will become apparent is if you are a member of NATO, you are protected. If you're not protected. And that's what's what seems clear at this point. Ukraine was not at the time a member of NATO, so we had no obligation. But if you're a member of NATO, NATO does have an obligation to do something about it. So this may work if this is an effort to diminish NATO by Putin. I don't think it is. I don't think that's the main thing, because otherwise he would have seen that this would have pushed other countries into NATO. That's why I don't think this is an attempt to destroy NATO. What he did by having Donald Trump in office, that might have been that denuded NATO. But the fact is that obviously that couldn't be too high on his agenda, because that's a recipe for failure on his part. And I don't think that's what he's.
Yeah, Frank, go ahead.
Stephen,
go ahead.
Yeah, I say I'm going to take my usual.
Okay, you got
it this time, and
that's a quarter to anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up. We're all distraught, and nobody's cheering on either side of this. It's bad news.
Yeah.
So let's hope that there's nothing to hope. Hope doesn't matter. We'll see what happens by the morning. Right?
Yeah. Or during the night.
Yeah.
Okay,
guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Everybody, goodbye. Let me just say goodbye to everybody before I tell
you. And I just found this, so let me just share one thing, which is the Russians have put up their no-fly zone that they impose, so you can see what they're, and it shows the current position of some planes, like airliners.
You're going to share it?
Okay, there. So there again, the yellow you can see is basically covering the borders of the Ukraine. So.
Right.
And so they're leaving for now Kiev out of it, but So, and you can also see where some of the planes are at the time. So.
Yeah, I don't think there's any point to speculate alternatives like, he's just taken out the anti-aircraft and he's only going to stay in the Doma.
We'll need to wait some time before we know what's actually going on. Okay. And who knows what we'll be told anyway by everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
All right.
So this is going viral. February 23rd, 2022. This is Ken Aaron in LA, Alex Stavropoulos in New York, and Mike Jankowitz in Queens. And Steve is gone now. Dennis Goldstein in New Jersey. Steve was with us, and thanks for being on.
And Jim Dingeman joined us for a minute.
Jim Dingeman from the Bronx. And
Victor Wallis.
Frank Radford in Manhattan.
And Victor Wallis from Boston, and Frank Radford from New York.
Yeah.
Okay, that's about it. All right, so thanks for watching. See you next week. Or actually, for those in the know, there's going to be a very significant historical military examination about Pearl Harbor on Saturday. Look in your emails and see if you have an invitation. Okay, and keep your sense about you. Don't go nuts while the world's cracking up. Be a source of stability for everybody else. Okay, those are my good words. Bye-bye.